a warm round of applause as you welcome to the stage Dr. Ken Berry.
Hey man, how's it going? Wow. Good morning, Austin and everybody. Who is not from Texas? That's pretty impressive. Who's at least 3 states away from home? Nice, I love it. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you guys can make it. I want to see another show of hands. I want to see the hands of every single healthcare provider, doctor, DOMD, nurse practitioner, PA. I dare say the percentage of healthcare providers is a little higher this year, and that's a good thing, right? That's evidence that this is working and this is happening. I've already talked to 2 family doctors, and they both said, you know, you can't argue with it. If it works, the end. And family doctors, we're kind of where the rubber meets the road. If it doesn't work, we quickly stop doing it. If it works, we do it more. And so watch the family docs come into this space. That's going to be an exciting thing. So, but the problem is that doctors very often, at least in the past, have given terrible nutrition advice, haven't they? So I'm going to talk about today why that is and what you can do about it. You're going to hear a lot of science during this conference, but today I'm going to talk to you about the science of human nature and the science of language, because those things are almost as important as the science, right? We all remember Dr. Robert Atkins, and he was right, but he was also an asshole. Love him, God rest his soul, but he wasn't a very nice guy. And so he didn't have the human nature that he needed to push this out, and he still blew up and was very popular. But if he had used his language properly and used the laws of human nature, he would have probably got more traction. And so we're going to talk about the science of human nature and the science of language today, and why doctors give such terrible nutrition advice. Okay, so disclosures. I've got the book I make a little money on, social media, Patreon, and I'm still waiting for the sponsorship from Big Pharma. Any day now, Pfizer or Merck or Eli Lilly, I'm sure they're going to reach out to me. It maybe got lost in my spam folder, I don't know. But I'm waiting on that, but still waiting. So who am I? Board-certified family physician. I've seen well over 20,000 patients, both in the clinic and the emergency department, labor and delivery. I've done it all. I'm family medicine in Tennessee. Family medicine literally does it all. I used to be 297 pounds. I had an A1C of 6.1, chronic severe daily reflux, dandruff, rosacea, allergies. I was just talking to an ENT who's here about my allergies, and I was pissed off every day about every single thing. I was miserable. My knees ached. I was miserable until I found this way of eating. You guys may know doctors receive very little training in nutrition, right? You've heard this. I got a 1-hour class 1 or 2 days a week for half a semester in all of my medical school. That's all I got. 90% of that training was very good training. And so if you were in a house fire and you were in the ICU and you were unconscious, or you were in an MVA, you couldn't feed yourself, they taught us the calculations. We could actually calculate how to keep you from dying while you were in the ICU and you couldn't eat for yourself. But when it came to the care and feeding of just regular folks, my entire training was eat lots of whole grains, avoid saturated fat, and jog. And we know how well that works, right? Yeah. So, but the problem is that nutrition is the very bedrock. It is the foundation that you're going to build your health on, right? So it's kind of important. We kind of need to know about that, and doctors kind of need to teach it. That's why doctors try to learn, and they try to understand, and they try to give nutrition advice. They know that they should know. Doctors know. We're like, that's common sense. I should know how to tell you how to eat. And patients expect us to know. Who hasn't asked their doctor for nutrition advice at some point? They should know, right? So we know we should know. Now here's a study or a paper published in the American College of Nutrition Journal. 77% of internal medicine interns, that's young doctors with the short coat, they agreed that nutrition should be included in the routine primary care visits. 94% of them agreed that it was an obligation to discuss nutrition. These young doctors knew. We're supposed to know about this, right? But only 14% felt adequately trained Now, I would guess, they didn't ask the patients, but I would guess that 100% of patients expected their doctor to know about nutrition, don't you? One click. Hey, it worked. All right, here's another paper from the Journal of Academic Medicine. Only 30% of medical schools have a dedicated nutrition course, at least back in 2010. Medical students receive 22 hours of nutrition instruction, and only 38% of the schools met the minimum 25 required hours of nutrition set by the National Academy of Sciences. So you can see this is atrocious, right? This is terrible. So the question comes, are doctors even qualified to give nutrition advice now that you know that? Well, most of them probably are not, but most of them probably should be. The problem is, and so our first 2 years of med school, we take physiology, cell and molecular biology, biochemistry, and those are great classes for human nutrition. We learn all the pathways, the Krebs cycle, all of that stuff, but then we promptly forget it because we're told, eat lots of whole grain, avoid saturated fat, and jog. And none of that stuff appears in the biochemistry, but yet that's the advice we get. There's this thing called long white coat syndrome. The older and wiser and more prestigious a doctor is, the longer his white coat, right? And so young doctors, medical students, their coat hits about here. And then residents, it's about here. And then your academic professor, he looks like Princess Diana coming in the room with his train, right? And so you don't argue with those guys. You learn very quickly in medical school. You take notes, you listen, you memorize. You don't ask probing questions. You don't contradict. You don't say yes, but, which was my favorite thing to say in medical school, and it didn't always work out that well. But what it does is it sets doctors up for failure because it leaves them ignorant of true human nutrition, but yet they've got this white coat, and so therefore they must know. But yet they don't know. And you see how it puts them in a very precarious position of learned ignorance. And it can be very dangerous to their patients, and indeed it has been dangerous over the last 50 years. Now, what is a fad? Everybody knows what a fad is. Who knows what this thing is? A Furby? Who had a Furby? Don't be shy. Just admit it. You had a Furby. You know you did. When you first bought that Furby, it was the coolest damn thing you ever had in your life. And you loved that Furby, and if you'd have had Instagram, you'd have posted a selfie with you and your Furby. Wouldn't you? But that's a fad. Now if somebody whipped out a Furby, we'd all be like, uh-huh, right? Sometimes we can have fad diets, and they come and go all the time. But the biggest fad diet is the diet that the federal government has been recommending for us to eat. That is the biggest fad diet, and I'm going to show you some information so that you can understand this. I don't want you to ever think of the ketogenic, low-carb, carnivore diet as a fad. It's not a fad, okay? It's been around for hundreds of thousands of years. The fad diet has been around for the last 50 or 60 years. That is the fad. Who's heard of the grapefruit diet and the cabbage soup diet? You've done them, right? You've done them. But then, obviously, the DASH diet by the American Heart Association, that should be based on good science, right? Sorry, not at all. The American Diabetes Association diet, that's got to have reams and reams of, oh no, it doesn't. It doesn't. They're fad diets, and they're based on the 77 guidelines. So the latest, biggest fad started in the 60s and 70s. And it would have died off very quickly because it doesn't work, as we all know, right? The reason it didn't die off is because it was promoted by our U.S. federal government. It was approved by Big Pharma because they quickly saw they were going to make hundreds of billions of dollars if people actually ate this way, right? Big Food, do you think they approved of the guidelines? Heck yeah, because you can make anything in the world out of processed carbohydrates. Anything from a tortilla to a pizza crust to a jelly donut, you can make them out of the same exact ingredients that are cheap, easy to get, and sit on the shelf without changing for 15 years. How many people have put fast food like up in the closet and just let it sit there for a year? Have you seen the pictures? Like you can put chicken nuggets, they could sit for 15 years. Not only would the coyotes not eat them, but they don't rot, they don't decompose because they're not real food. And then doctors, of course, jumped on because the federal government was involved, and they said, oh yes, this is how you should eat, even though it's ridiculous. Now here's the guy that kind of started it all, and we all know who he is. Anybody doesn't know who that is? Ansel Keys. He was a fish biologist, but somehow he became an expert in human nutrition. Not sure how that worked, but he was a public relations genius. He was very good at manipulating his colleagues, unlike Dr. Atkins. He was very good at getting press. He was very good at getting on television, and he wanted to be the guy that saved humanity by coming up with a diet for humans. And so he also cherry-picked his data, which you can read about on the internet, and he only published the data that made it look like you should eat lots of whole grains and avoid saturated fat and jog. So let's look at this. This is very interesting. From 1949 until 1977, they studied the diet of Americans. Look at their macros: 20 to 30% carbs, 40 to 50% fat, 20 to 30% protein. That's not terrible, is it? But after the 77 guidelines, look at the macros. 60% carbs, less than 30% fat, with a third of that being saturated fat, and 15 to 20% protein. That is a recipe for obesity and every other chronic disease that we see now. So this fad diet came, and it would have definitely went away, just like the cabbage soup diet, right? That's what would have happened to that diet, except for these three reports: the U.S. Senate, the Surgeon General, and the Dietary Guidelines for America. These huge federal publications were published. All the media reported on them. All the doctors said, well, God, it must be important. The federal government took the time to put it in writing. And then that's what set this fad in stone. Now this is policy. It's not just a fad anymore. The federal government says it's good for you. But have doctors always given fad, stupid, useless nutrition advice? I think that's a valid question, and let's look at this. So, first of all, calorie. We've all heard about calories, right? Calories in, calories out, burn more, eat less. We know how well that works. So this physicist invented the calorie, basically described what a calorie is. It's a unit of heat energy back in 1824. Now remember that date, 1824, that's when the calorie started being talked about. And physicists used this. They talked about this with heat, with regards to heat and the movement of heat. That's what it's all about, right? Now check this out. The first law of thermodynamics, how many people have heard of this? Calorie in, calorie out people love this, man. They love this. The total energy in a system is constant. Energy can be transformed, but it can neither be created nor destroyed, right? That's why a calorie is a calorie. That's why you hear that crap all the time. But there's a problem, because the first law of thermodynamics actually says the total energy in a closed system. That's a requirement for the first law of thermodynamics to apply. Is the human body a closed system? Think about that. It's not at all. It's one of the most open systems out there. Basically, we are a tube, right? We have an outside and an inside, and then some guts around that, but we're basically a tube, like an empty toilet paper roll. That's how we draw it in physiology class, okay? What about the chair you're sitting on right now? Is that affecting your body heat? Sure is. What about the ambient temperature in this room? Would you burn more calories if it were hotter? What about if it were colder? Right? What about if you had a minor little viral infection and your body temperature was a half degree higher than normal? Is that going to affect your calories? Absolutely. Everything in this room, the person sitting next to you, is affecting your rate that you burn calories. Trying to calculate somebody's caloric need is a calculus problem. And so if anybody on the internet says, oh, tell me your height, weight, and your gender, and your general activity level, and I'll tell you what your calorie expenditure is, they are full of shit. Okay? If anybody can say, tell me those things, and I'm going to tell you your calorie expenditure, if you jog an hour, if you lift weights, if you do this, that is an unknowable number. Okay? It would take mathematicians and supercomputers to figure up your caloric expenditure and your caloric needs each day. It's a knowable number, but not knowable to me and you. And definitely not knowable with that stupid calorie calculator on the internet. Does that make sense? It's unknowable. If anyone ever tells you this is your caloric need for the day, you can hit unfollow right then, because they do not know what the hell they're talking about. It does not work that way. It is a physics problem. It is not a simple mathematical calculation. It's calculus. Okay. Back in 1825, this is a year after the calorie was first described, the Physiology of Taste, which was a culinary science book, said one can easily identify the cause of obesity after 30 years of talking with one fat individual after another who proclaimed the joys of bread, rice, and potatoes. The effects of this intake are exacerbated when sugar is consumed as well. Slimming, that's what they called it back then, not weight loss or fat loss. They called it slimming. Kind of nice, I like that. Slimming is achieved by more or less rigid abstinence from everything that is starchy or floury. So in 1825, they knew, didn't they? All right? What did he not mention in that? Calories. He didn't mention calories, did he? Okay, what about in 1844, Dr. Dansell said, all food which is not flesh, all food rich in carbon and hydrogen, that's a carbohydrate, right, must have a tendency to produce fat. In 1844, he said carbohydrates must have a tendency to produce fat. Upon these principles only can any rational treatment for the cure of obesity satisfactorily rest. Carnivores are never fat, whereas herbivores living exclusively on plants often are. The hippopotamus, for example, so uncouth in form. Don't you love that language? So uncouth in form, with its immense amount of fat, feeds wholly upon vegetable matter, rice, millet, sugarcane, etc. What did he not mention? Calories. 1862, Dr. William Harvey. So the word saccharine back then meant sugar, sugary. So a sugary food would be a saccharine food. That's how they described it. And farinaceous means made of grain. Got that? Knowing that a saccharine and farinaceous diet is used to fatten certain animals, it's used to fatten certain animals. And that in type 1 diabetes, the whole of the fat of the body rapidly disappears, it occurred to me that excessive obesity might be allied to diabetes as to its cause, and that if a purely animal diet were useful in the latter disease, so they fed their type 1 diabetics meat back then. That was just common practice. They knew that back then. A combination of animal food with such vegetable diet as contained neither sugar nor starch might serve to arrest the undue formation of fat. What did he not mention? Calories. 1864, William Banting. Who's heard of him? The Banting diet, right? That's kind of one of the things that started all this, or at least made it popular. It didn't start it at all. After losing 50 pounds, Mr. Banting said, I have not felt better in health than now for the last 26 years. Who feels like that? I haven't felt better than this in a decade, 20 years, 30 years, right? Same thing. My other bodily ailments have become mere matters of history. Sound familiar? What did he not mention? Interesting. Are we seeing a trend here? These guys knew what they were talking about and they didn't mention calories. What about 1866 in the Lancet? And I love this. Now, this was after, Banting wrote a book about dieting, right? And it became the best-selling diet book, like the first best-selling diet book ever. Okay? And it pissed off all the doctors. Because they're like, I'm supposed to be giving the advice here. What are you doing? Who's this guy? He's an undertaker. He doesn't know anything. So the Lancet published this in 1866, and I love this. Listen carefully to this one. The medical literature is tolerably complete. That means we know what the hell we're talking about. And supplies abundant evidence that all which Mr. Banting advised has been written over and over again. So basically, the medical societies looked at Banting and they said, duh. Yeah, cut out the sugar and starch if you want to lose weight. Duh, we know that. We've written about it over and over and over. Doctors back then knew that. You cut out the carbs if you want to lose fat. What did the Lancet Journal not mention? Interesting. 1882, Obesity and Its Treatment. This is a medical textbook. Fatty foods are crucial because they increase satiety and so decrease fat accumulation. Does that sound familiar? Satiety? I thought it was only us keto people that use that word. Here they knew about this word in 1882. Avoid sugar, sweets, and potatoes. Limit bread and vegetables. Meat of every kind may be eaten, and fat meat especially. I think they meant brisket. 1882, standard of care. What did he not mention? Interesting. 1951, this is another medical textbook. Foods to be avoided, bread and everything else made of flour, cereals, including breakfast cereals and milk, puddings. Breakfast cereal makes you fat. They knew it in 1951. Potatoes and all other white root vegetables and all sweets. Or you can eat as much as you like as meat, fish, and birds, all green vegetables, eggs, dried or fresh. I don't know what a dried egg is, do you? What is that? Must be a thing they did. And then fruit, except for the famous banana and the grape. Don't eat those because they're really just sacks of sugar. In 1951, what did this medical endocrinology textbook not mention? 1957, another doctor, Dr. Bruch, said the great progress in dietary control of obesity was the recognition that meat was not fat producing, but that it was the innocent foodstuffs such as bread and sweets which led to obesity. It was known. And again, what did he not mention? 1962, another textbook. In Great Britain, obesity is probably more common among poor women than among the rich, perhaps because foods rich in fat and protein, which satisfy appetite and more readily than carbohydrates, are more expensive than the starchy foods, which provide the bulk of cheap meals for poor people. You can make anything out of grains and industrial seed oils and sugar, and you can make it cheap, and it sits on the shelf for years. They knew this back then, and once again, what did they not mention? So this is how I think about every single thing. Before I make a YouTube video or Nisha and I go live on Facebook, I think, okay, what does paleoanthropology show me about this topic? What does anthropology tell me about this topic? What's just the damn common sense of this topic? Right? And those are the two most important things for me, because then I'll look for meaningful research. Okay? Not some epidemiology study that did one food frequency questionnaire 45 years ago. That's not meaningful research. I mean meaningful research. So if what I'm doing makes ancestral sense and it makes common sense, then you better have some damn good research before you come at me saying, oh, you shouldn't do the thing that we've been doing for 250,000 years, and you shouldn't do the thing that every damn doctor to a man and woman knew back in the 1800s. How does that make any sense for that to say, well, that's dumb, don't do that? That'll give you a heart attack. Here's the human timeline. Now, actually, 250,000 years ago would be way over there by the wall. That's how long that we've been eating a fatty meat heavy diet. And then we come along through all the thousands of years, and then we get to about 12 to 15,000 years ago, we started eating grain in any kind of proportion whatsoever. And then 1,000 years later, we started using dairy to any meaningful degree. And then we discovered alcohol. Hallelujah. Right? And then even further in the future, and there's Banting, there's Dr. Osler, 1960 to 2019, where the current fad has been in effect, and then today. So you can see the immensity of the timeline where we've been eating as much fatty meat as we can get our hands on, a little bit of veg if you wanted it, and not eating starchy stuff because it'll make you fat. But only for this little tiny period of time, right? See that? Versus all the way to the wall. Now they're saying, no, this is standard of care. This is what you should do. Those thousands of years of experience were just stupid. Just ignore those. You want to focus right here? I don't think so. I don't think that makes any sense at all. Here's what gets me. Here's what gets me out of bed every morning. Here's what gets me going and fired up to be here today. This is why. You guys have heard the story of Dr. Semmelweis. I'm not going to tell the whole story. I'll tell it very quickly. He was a doctor back in the early 1800s. He's a Hungarian doctor, and he delivered babies. And he thought, doctors probably shouldn't go from the morgue doing autopsies and playing around with dead guts. shouldn't go straight from there and deliver babies. That's probably bad, right? We should probably wash our hands before we do that. But doctors were considered gentlemen at that time, and gentlemen are never dirty. By definition, they're not dirty. Does that make sense? You see the social thing? He was a young doctor. He had a relatively short white coat. But here's the thing I really want you to get from this. He did everything right. He did the research. He wrote up the papers. He published the papers in the journals. And he showed a huge drop in death from childbirth fever by just washing your hands. Wash your hands, dude. He was run completely out of medicine. He was stripped of all his integrity, all his dignity. He wound up in an insane asylum. And he died there. But he was right. Now, here's the key thing that gets me out of bed, and the thing I want to start getting you out of bed as well. He was right. Should you wash your hands before you play with rotten guts and then go deliver a baby? Yeah? You think? He was right, but he also published it, and it didn't matter at all. They ignored him for how long? Who knows? How many years after he published the paper did doctors actually start washing their hands after they'd been playing with a dead body or scratching their butt or whatever before they went to deliver a baby? How many years? 70 years. Think about that for a second. How many women died in 70 years? How many women died who did not have to die? How many children died who did not have to die just because of the learned ignorance of the doctors, the arrogance? You understand me? We're dealing with the same exact thing today. And if we wait for the doctors with the long white coats to hold a press conference and say, hey, you know that whole wheat thing? Just forget that. That's not right. I don't know what we were thinking. That press conference is never going to happen. So how many grandparents are we going to lose? How many children are we going to lose? How many moms and dads and brothers and sisters are going to die prematurely or wind up in a nursing home prematurely before this changes? How many years is it going to be before we see that press conference where the American Diabetes Association says, eat lots of fatty meat? When's that going to happen? Right? Are you willing to just say, oh, well, screw it. I guess we'll just not wash our hands for 70 more years and let a bunch of people die? I'm not prepared to do that. And I hope that you're not prepared to do that too. We've got a lot of healthcare providers in here who are already woke. They know, yeah, I can't go to work every day and not tell people about this because it's the truth. You guys are going to help me to change the world. This is never going to come from the top down. It's going to come from this grassroots, this people, this keto family right here. We're going to change this and stop this foolishness and save people's lives. That's us. The beauty of this is we have social media now. This is a powerful tool that no other human has ever had in the history on this planet. You, a nobody, a factory worker, somebody who's unemployed, you can live in your car if you got a smartphone. You didn't pay your car payment, but you paid your smartphone payment, right? You can literally save people's life. How sexy is that? That's pretty awesome, right? You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to have a long white coat. You can just be you, and you can live your life, and you can share your story, and you can literally save people's lives. But what do you need to do? You need to learn, obviously. You need to know what you're talking about. Remember all those doctors back in the 1800s? They said eat lots of fatty meat and don't eat any starchy stuff. You guys know that already. You're as smart as a doctor in the 1800s when it comes to human nutrition. Do you need any further training? I don't think so. I think that's what you need. And then you're going to lead, and then you're going to share your story. And let's break each one of these down. How are you going to learn? Videos, articles, blogs, websites. Go to conferences like this, and you can even have consultations with your doctor. Bounce these ideas off your doctor. You might teach your doctor, and that'd be pretty cool too. You're going to lead by quiet example. I've already talked to 3 people this morning who have done this. Women who started keto, and their husband was like, that's stupid, I'm going to go watch TV. After 6 months of keto, and she looks like a different woman, she looks like a woman from 20 years ago, he's like, what the hell? What is this keto thing? She's leading by quiet example, isn't she? That's the most excellent way to lead, is to fix you. Fix you, and people will literally seek you out and say, what are you doing? How many people have been asked that question? Look at that. When they say, why are you doing that? They're not ready to hear you. But when they say, what are you doing? They're ready to hear you then, aren't they? And that's what we're looking for. Passive resistance. You're going to be posting stuff. You're going to be talking to your neighbors. You're going to be voting with your dollars when you go to the grocery. You're not going to be buying crap in the middle of the store. You're going to stick to the outer wall where the real food is, right? You're going to share your story with everybody. You're going to try to teach your doctor, but he may be hard-headed. Good luck with that. You're going to speak out. You're going to ask questions. Now, let's talk about family dynamics for a second. This is very important. Who knows what powdered butt syndrome is? This is why it's so damn hard to get your mama to listen to you. She has powdered your naked little butt. And you could be a brain surgeon and a rocket scientist together, and you still would not know what the hell you're talking about. Anybody experience that? Absolutely. So you're going to use ninja level tactics, and you're going to find mom's friend, and you're going to teach mom's friend about keto. Or you're going to maybe play her a Dr. Berry video accidentally. Right? Parents and uncles and aunts usually won't listen to you because they remember when you used to pick your nose and fart and scratch your butt and sniff it. They just remember that about you, and they're just not going to listen to you. You got to find a way around that if you want to save your older relatives. Share stories. We're fighting two huge dragons, Big Pharma, Big Food. Together, they make hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year off our ignorance and off our disease. Do you think they're going to allow advertisements on television? They'll pull their ads. If television stations start to talk about keto too much, they'll pull their ads. They're not going to allow it. But we've got this huge social media family. How many people feel like this is a family reunion today? Is that not the coolest thing ever? People you've never met before are part of your family. That is a wonderful thing, right? And I want you to think of all of us as a family. And I'm here, Nisha's here. If you want to come say hi, do not be shy. You're going to hurt my feelings if you're shy. I don't like that, okay? Nisha Berry once said to me, when I came home from the Berry Clinic after a hard day at work, bitching about something, she said, why don't you make a YouTube video? And I said, that's dumb. Why would I do that, right? She said this thing, you see 30 people a day at the Berry Clinic. You help 30 people a day. That's great. I'm proud of you. But what if you could help 3,000 people a day? What if you could help 30,000 people a day? That's YouTube. That's social media. And I was like, okay, you're right. I actually said that. You guys have that same power. You guys have that same power. You have that exponential power of social media to help people. How many smartphones are there in the world right now? I'm talking about a phone you can get out and be on Facebook, not flip phones. 2 billion. 2 billion. And by 2020, there's going to be 2.5 billion people on the planet with a smartphone that can see your post, that can see your before and after picture, that can read your story on your blog. Think about that. Social media and the internet is basically going to take Big Pharma and big Food out of the equation. Who still watches network TV? Not many people. We're too busy on Facebook watching that crazy live. That's good. That's a good thing because that's where the change is going to happen. Now let's talk for a second about language. I told you we're going to talk about this. Let's stop talking about the keto diet and the low-carb diet and the Banting diet. What if we started calling it the proper human diet? Because it seems like back in the 1800s, they kind of knew that, duh, it's the proper human diet. And if you say that, then it makes those questions. You know those questions you get every day on social media? Can I do keto if I have fill in the blank? Right? It's kind of hard. That question becomes silly if they say, well, if I don't have a gallbladder, can I do the proper human diet? Well, never mind. That's dumb. Yeah, of course I can. This is the proper human diet. That's what we're talking about here, isn't it? This is how humans are supposed to eat. And when you call it that, you flip the story, don't you? You flip the script. Now you're in charge. They've got to come to your language. They're going to want to call this a fad diet. You're going to go, no, this is a proper human diet. Doctors in the 1800s knew about it. People 20,000 years ago, that's how they ate. This is not a fad. This is a proper human diet. Then the ball's in your court. Let's stop talking about things like bulletproof coffee. Let's call it keto coffee or fatty coffee. Let's talk about it like that because that's a brand name. Let's stop talking about weight loss. Who wants to lose muscle in here? Who wants to lose bone density? No? Who wants to lose fat? Right? Let's start talking about fat loss because that's what we're after. We don't want to lose muscle or bone. We want to lose fat. We want to have fat loss. The last one's kind of tricky. Is type 2 diabetes, is that a disease? What about fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver? Is that a disease? Think about this. What about eczema? What about psoriasis? What about all these chronic things that we have? Are those diseases? Or are they just signs of poisoning? What if the diet, that fad diet that we've been eating for the last 50 years is just full of slow poisons? They won't kill you today, but they're going to hurt your liver and they're going to hurt your pancreas and they're going to hurt your joints and hurt your stomach. What if we start talking about the proper human diet, keto coffee, fasting coffee? Let's talk about losing weight and let's talk about carbohydrate poisoning or carbohydrate overdose. Type 2 diabetes is not a disease that you have. It's poisoning that was caused by the amount of carbohydrates you're eating. That's why when we talk about reversing or curing diabetes, that triggers a lot of people. But if you just say, I stopped overdosing on carbs, that's kind of hard to argue with, isn't it? You see how that puts the ball in your court? Then they got to come to you if they want to talk about this. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for your attention. And I love you guys all. You're like a big family. Come say hi.